So I'm so happy today to welcome Douglas Brown to the Divorce Doctor podcast. In an age of ambivalence, avoidance, and anesthesia, Douglas recognizes a need to slow down, be centered, and get mindful of who we are so then we can decide what we're doing and where we're going and why. As he says, for many men in particular, this numbness extends beyond what we do and seeps into our emotional, mental, and spiritual lives as we search for ways to be braver, bolder, and better. Douglas holds a master's of social work from NYU. He employs a balanced mind, body, spirit approach to support clients facing substance abuse struggles, anxiety, depression, life changes, career moves, relationship issues, grief, and general life transitions. He's an accredited running coach and previously worked in advertising, media, and technology. And today he is here as someone going through a separation with all of those other credentials. Thanks, Douglas, for being here. I'm really grateful that you agreed to be on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and looking forward to talking about all that stuff.
Yeah, me too. So I always start the podcast asking people the same question. And so I want to ask you, and for the audience to know you're in the separation. So we're going to refer to it as a separation rather than your divorce. So what's the word you would use to describe your separation process? The one word.
Wow, one word.
you can do two.
I'm going to say brave and unknown.
Beautiful. I love the word brave, Douglas. And actually, with the people I work with, I refer to them as superheroes because I actually think it's one of the bravest things we can do to either choose divorce or accept the divorce or separation if someone tells us they want that. So I totally agree with you. So I'd like to talk about, a lot of times I hear people say, oh, I waited too long, or I should have done it sooner. A lot of judgment about how long somebody waited before separation. I'm just wondering for you, if you could share a little bit about kind of the time between when you had that first little, sound in your ear or in your gut and now. Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
I can. And actually it was a very pointed moment. So in the process of, living our lives, and we've been together for quite a long time and had a couple children, it became obvious that we were kind of going in different directions. And I don't think, and we both just kind of went with it for a while. And then after that point, we were like, okay, maybe we should go see a couples counselor because, that's what everybody says. I'm a therapist, but there's resistance. So we did that, and I was able to pinpoint literally the exact moment when we were on vacation once in San Diego, where I literally thought to myself, in the midst of that week, I was like, I'm done. I give up. I just can't. And if I told you this story, it was such an innocuous moment when we were literally at a taco stand in California, and this beautiful vacation. And some of it's predicated on the fact that going on vacation for us was always a bit fraught because control issues, where we're going to go, how we're going to go there. She kind of liked to go to the same place and do the same things. And I was like, I love Montauk and Miami, but I want to go somewhere else. So we went to San Diego and we were there. And my youngest daughter is allergic to cilantro. And we were ordering for the girls and, we're on this vacation. And literally came to this, she was going to order the taco soup or the tortilla soup, even though it had cilantro in it, and I was saying that there's cilantro in it, and our daughter's allergic to cilantro, and she insisted that we get the soup for her, and as seemingly as innocuous as that is, but I was like, I can't do this anymore because I was constantly in this position where I felt like, or I thought my decisions don't matter, my input, something as obvious and as real as she's gonna, she's allergic to this thing was over.
Right. And I love that example, Douglas, because I think, so many people talk on the podcast about these, which feel like innocuous moments, but they're your moment. They're your moment, whatever that might be, where you just feel like enough is enough. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be, I think even as a therapist, people think, oh, you're going to have a big explosion in a couples therapy office and you're going to decide. Like, no, it's usually at somewhere like a taco stand or driving home or on a bicycle.
It's like you're ordering cilantro. Yeah.
Exactly.
And the interesting thing it was then, so this character actually came up in a couples counseling session 3 years later.
Ah,
So to your point was like, oh, that for me, it took 3 years to get from there to the courage and the bravery and the ability to say, okay, this is going a different way.
yeah.
And then when I later found out for her, hers was actually further back than that, which, you know, that was part of the process, was recognizing, and this is something that I think happens a lot with men, is like, it's not just me, or maybe we all do this, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, it's my fault, it's something I did, or it's only cilantro, why am I going to leave a marriage based on that?
Yes,
But
exactly.
it's so much more than that, and
Yeah.
that matters.
It's really powerful also, Douglas, to think about how both of you were so comfortable settling for so much disconnect in the relationship. Like she felt it even earlier than you 3 years. I mean, I think it's really profound how what we're willing to tolerate, because I think of the stigma of divorce and the stigma of marriage. It's really a lot.
And I think it brings us back to those two words, like brave and unknown, because I had no idea. And in our situation, like she was essentially the primary money earner. She has a bigger job or whatever. I was sort of more the default, you know, the go-to parent because of that, and the way that dynamic had set up. And we had done that, it was like, oh my gosh, what if? And
Yeah.
having the people and the patience to be like, okay, it's totally unknown, but I can't keep doing what I'm doing. That's a
Right. I think you're right. I wonder if you see that with clients too, because I see that there's a moment where the intolerability of the unknown is better than being in the relationship and just feeling awful, essentially, or unfulfilled or afraid, right?
Yeah, totally. And that sense that the fear of change is less than the fear of staying the same.
Very well said. That's perfect.
You know?
Exactly.
And we are so, as we both know in our work, that in these ways that we get so comfortable, the body, the mind, the spirit, all that gets set in this rut, literally, or just get in this position where we stay.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this is okay. And to move out of that at all in grander or smaller schemes is really hard.
Really hard. How did you get yourself to start thinking about the possibility that there might be something different, that how you're thinking of how it would be so terrible, there might be something, there might be a small, tiny possibility of something different? Do you recall?
Yeah, a good therapist.
Yeah. Shout out to a good therapist. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I've because I've done it before with other things, and I've been able to see how that can work, even when I don't really know how it's going to work.
Right. It's a good example of your work, right? In my book, I talk about the cognitive strategy of like, when did I go through something hard before and how did it work out for me? I mean, you moved from advertising to being a therapist. Like you did a huge move, and that was unknown, I imagine.
Yeah, totally. And some of it, frankly, is it's faith. It's having some other people. And then I think what we were just talking about, like, if I just can't do this. So anything different is going to be different. I mean, this is, I think, where you get into the judgment, right? And the good and the bad.
I like that.
Lesser or worse, or she's going to have all the money and I'm not going to have any. But in a way, it's trying to find the sense that the different is okay. It's not bad.
Yes. I love that. I'm gonna write that down. I love that. Different is okay, not bad. You're right, because we get into this, feeling of right or wrong, black or white, right? And we feel like, okay, well, this is not going to be good. I'll just stay. Like if it's going to be hard, but this idea of embracing difference, I love that. That's really powerful. And what was that like? I'm just curious, since you were it sounds like you were the primary caretaker for the kids. I imagine that was also just kind of different than what you probably didn't hear a lot of stories of dads, first of all, in your circumstance before you got divorced, but then also separating. Yeah. It's
a tough one. I mean, we had a caretaker that came into the house, and my girls are teenagers now. So she was with us for 12 or 14 years, like the same woman. Actually, amazing. So she helped a lot of that, but that's been a big shift for me because fatherhood was really important. Yeah. I have 2 daughters, and in our work or just in the world, the way women are treated and all those things really matter to me. And I did embrace I wasn't the stay-at-home parent, but I embraced that role for a while. And to be honest, that's been one of the harder parts of the separation for me. And then being able to know that the caretaker was there, so that sort of handoff was being handled. Yeah. And also ironically enough, now a couple of years later, we probably communicate and talk better than we did then. And so we've been able to balance some of that out. So that we both get our time.
Yeah, I do want to mention this, and I'm curious also just if you can say if you've seen this in your male clients, but I have certainly seen in my male clients that one of the biggest concerns they have is, are they going to lose access to their children? I mean, I think women have it too, but there's this real panic that I have seen in men. So do you see that too? And is that something you experienced?
I do see that. And I also see, remarkably, a lot of men that aren't nearly as engaged in fatherhood as I am, or it definitely varies. So in figuring that out and kind of where they stand.
Yeah.
And what I find is not only is that the concern, but I think what's underneath it is I almost hate to say this, but am I gonna win or lose?
Yeah.
Whether it's like disciplinary, emotional, mental, money, finances, she gonna buy stuff, like, there's that getting more or less
yeah,
be underneath that, which of course can, for me, gets to like, am I okay? Am I enough? Do I make enough money? Do I do this? Do I do that? When ultimately what they really want is time, so
yeah.
And some access, I learned that along the way, kind of the hard way. But yeah, it's
that's such a good reframe, Douglas, of like when you feel like someone is going after something that you have, that suddenly, instead of feeling like I won't have enough, the feeling is like I'm not enough. I really like that reframe.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a tough one though.
It's really tough, especially when you've ended a relationship, because it's hard to not go back to this idea of, if I was smarter, made more money, if I was prettier, if I was thinner, fill in the adjective, things would have worked out. So I feel like it's an ongoing process of compassion and loving yourself and saying like, you are worthy. In my book, I talk about, how different it would be if we said to ourselves, my relationship has come to its perfect conclusion. It gave me everything it needed to. It's not that I screwed it up or they screwed it up, but it was the time. Just like when it was time for you to leave advertising, it was time for you to shift. So how different it would be if we just thought about it differently.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Because it's funny because I talk about a lot of those things where, feelings, thoughts, everything is temporary, right? And I'm like going totally Buddhist, but in a way that's where, I'm feeling really sad. Okay, if you wait 10, 20 minutes, seconds, days, it's going to be different, right?
Yeah.
We know that up here, but we don't always feel that. And I think some of that can be true for relationships. It's like, I've had relationships that lasted, 10 days. I'm like, oh my gosh. And maybe that person had an impact on me, but it's just because we happen to be at that place at that particular time. Maybe it was a relationship or something. And I think we do have this expectation that everything's got to be forever. And recognizing, that was 15 years and it was amazing. And it definitely takes some stepping back to say, okay, that kind of did this. And now what am I going to do from here?
Yeah, I love that. But such a different perspective. So I wanted to talk a little bit because we were just saying before we started recording that you have been in your apartment 1 year to the day, which is so cool for when we're recording. And which also means for all of you out there, and I have clients who've gone through this, that you moved out right in the height of the pandemic. So can you talk a little bit about what it's been like to be separated during the pandemic and things you learned that you didn't think you were going to learn?
Yes. It was a process because we initially tried, forgot the term. We rented an apartment that we shared, but we would spend time at home.
Oh yeah, I forgot what that's called too. There's like there's a word for it, nest or something.
Right. So we did that for a little while, and then kind of knowing our patterns and our habits, I knew we were going to come up against this real estate deadline, and that we subletted this place. And so I then found a place to live with roommates in Dumbo. And that was kind of really when the separation became really real. But so I was living with them and I knew that was a temporary thing. And January of 2020, I started the process of like, okay, I'm gonna look for an apartment and go through all that. And it was supposed to happen March 15th, but everything closed like March 17th or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just stressful enough in New York to find a place, to get the deposits, to scrape up the money, to do all this stuff. And the complications of like, do I ask? If it had been our tax return, that would have been no problem, but it's this stuff. I navigated through all that. I got to this place. And then we had to postpone it. And I kind of pushed the co-op board a little bit. in the rental, but to move in April the 15th. And the good part about that was there was no traffic, there was no people, there was no elevator problems.
Right.
The guy and woman I was living with helped me, and I had no stuff. I literally was living in a bedroom. So that was an interesting thing too, because all of that, the material things I sort of left behind. And so moving was actually very easy. And then I got here, right? And suddenly it's like the pandemic is still going on. It's increasing. It got really tough. And I didn't have a whole lot of stuff. And it was scary. It was lonely. It was sad. It was noisy. It was fearful in the sense of not knowing, and then not knowing about not knowing, because the pandemic was just like, oh my gosh.
Right. It was like double unknown, and just such a deep trauma for those of us in New York. I mean, just grief and loss. It was just horrific. Yeah.
And having a fairly small network anyway, I had sort of talked and thought about that January, February, March, and then suddenly it was gone. So whether it was guy friends or co-workers or colleagues, or just, hey, I can go to the movies and disappear for 2 hours, you know, kind of all that went away. And then what I started finding was I had to be very careful that I didn't do that to myself, because I can, I mean, in our grief, but I can isolate very quickly. You know, and I have this external thing like, oh, I'm capable and I'm smart and I can do all these things. I have a career and I have my children, and here it all looks good. And inside, I'm just like, oh my God, I have no idea what's going on. So it was balancing a lot of that. And in a way, it was actually going really into that and doing the deep work.
Yeah. Were you able to do that? Like, did you, or at what point did you think, because I feel like we hear that, you know, like, oh, I had this time to really go deep, but sometimes it's not by choice, right?
Yeah, and that's actually part of the story. So I was kind of doing that, but not really going there very, you know, kind of intentionally, and it's hard to do when you're really that raw. And then as the summer came along, and I started seeing someone, and so we spent a lot of time out of the city for the summer. I spent a month, July in a different state, and then I went to places. So the summer was the summer, and then when I came back, September, October, that relationship ended, and I got hit by the freight train of the whole thing. So that relationship and what maybe I was trying to build on that, and it was significant, as they all are. But then here came a lot of the marriage stuff at the same time. And to be honest with you, I found this book. It's called The Wild Edge of Sorrow by a guy named Francis Weller. And it's about the journey into grief. And I just went full on and went way into it. And it was incredible. And the other thing that happened at the same time was I got back into this apartment in the summer, and I looked around and I was like, this looks like a college dormitory. Because I just didn't have much stuff. And all of a sudden I was like, wait, I want this to be my home. So I took the credit card, I splurged a bit, I worked with a woman who gave me great ideas, and I built like I now have a home. It felt like my place. And then because I have that place, this grief work at the same time, which I also do clinically, I went really, really dove into it, and probably maybe a month ago kind of came out of that, so to speak.
Wow. Well, thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing your experience. I really appreciate it. I know it's not easy as a man, it's not easy as a therapist. So I'm so grateful for for your honesty and your bravery for doing that. And I think it's such a interesting point, what you said about, you know, that all the marriage grief came up after the other relationship ended. I mean, I think I want people to know that happens. Like, don't, you know, I think there's this like thing that people say like, oh, you shouldn't jump into a relationship. Like sometimes you need to jump into the relationship for the grief to get kicked up. Like there's no right way to do this. I mean, I wrote a book about it, but I'm not telling you like, this is how you're supposed to do it. It's like, here's what might come up. Right. And for you, maybe you wouldn't have been able to access, I know for me, I wouldn't have been able to access like deep childhood grief if I hadn't gone through the divorce. Like I needed that to go there. Right.
Yeah. It really was an impetus for that. And fortunately knowing and having people around that could identify that and help me see that like, oh yeah. And also separate the two. So this was about the girlfriend breakup, and this is about the marriage, and oh, this is about mom, like from, you know, wherever. So, and being able to recognize which was very helpful in processing and then realizing, okay, what was I doing, or why was I doing it? How was I getting there?
Yeah, so good. So Douglas, one of the modalities I'm trained in is the somatic experiencing. And one of the things we talk about there is sometimes we have these balls of pipe cleaners like all together. And like when you're in that group and you just kind of pull them all out and you're like the girlfriend, the relationship, my marriage, my children. And when you can kind of see them separately, there's this spaciousness. You're like, I can handle one of these at a time. I can't handle them all on top of each other, but I can do one at a time, right?
Yeah. And the one thing it also brought up was the layers of, or maybe that's, all the pipe cleaners that are involved in loss, or especially in separation and breaking up a relationship, either one of those, because there's people that we met through each other, friends, people kind of friends that my ex-wife has, first that I lost, even the loss of that time for my children, or her parents, my parents, the extended families, and all of a sudden when that starts to untangle, as you said, it's layer after layer after layer, and it's wow. And that for me was what really got me back to I am me and I am here, and that's where it starts. Even with all those people around, and you do end up with yourself, no matter. Even and part of what he talks about in the book is there's a community aspect of grief and there's a individual aspect of grief. And all of them get us back to, okay, well, it is, I am here with myself. Okay.
Right. What are we going to do with this? So sounds like you really, were ready when you were ready. I guess I want to say that to people too. I mean, I had this experience. I was seeing, 25 clients a week while my marriage was falling apart. Or when I was, like we can look on the outside like we've got it all together, and we can work. It's not like I'm sure you were doing great work. I was doing good work, but it's only when we're ready to step into that can we do it. And I'm sure plenty of people told you needed to work on your stuff, and plenty of people told me, but it was only when I was ready. And so I think that's really important that it was on your timing.
Yeah. I think that, and I think you mentioned this earlier, that I think that's really important with the judgment and the construct of separation, divorce, however you go about it. And I found out there's all these different ways to do it. Like that idea of like we share an apartment in one place, the nesting idea, or how you divide things up, or there's just different ways to go about it. I think, and one of the things I had to reflect on was like, when my parents got divorced when I was 8 years old, what was that like? And then I could do it differently. It doesn't mean, I'm never going to see you again, or you disappear, or you run off with the secretary, or whatever. Like it's, hey, there's different ways to go about it. And I think that's another thing that we're lucky to have nowadays, because we can help collectively and individually decide what it is we want to do and how we want to do that.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm just had this moment of deep recognition of what a gift it is to your girls that you're doing the grief work.
Yeah. Which actually relates back to that earlier question too, about what was the moment I knew. It's not only that moment I didn't want it to stay the same. I also know that what I do reflects on them, and I didn't want that to sort of be this. I wanted their experience to be different, I guess, so they could actually see us go through this, and even now, a couple of years later, be friends, so to speak, and be in each other's lives, but it's a different dynamic. And hopefully they can see that, mom's happier or dad's happier, and that actually did something productive as opposed to like negative or destructive or.
Right. And that it's actually when things aren't working, it's better to step away from it rather than stick it out. Like that's not something we ever want to teach our kids. Right. And so I hear this a lot too, that like, kids will say to me, like, my dad's so much happier. My mom's so much happier. And I think the parents don't always hear that, but they know, of course they notice, they can tell.
Right.
So what's
we did decide intentionally that we're not going to stay together for the children.
Yeah.
And that's again, I think it's a bit of an older construct, but I still hear it as well, which is like, well, if we just wait till they're out of the house.
Exactly.
You move out of the house, your kid comes home from college and you're divorced. Like, oh my God. Like,
right. Exactly. So what's the piece that you couldn't see coming of the separation, but changed you for the better, do you think?
I think having a real dialogue with myself. And also, I mean, part of that notion that I felt like I was always kind of in second place or had sort of lost myself. And being able to see that more clearly.
Yeah. And if I think about you decorating your house, I mean, your apartment, that's a perfect example of like being seen, like what you want, like all that mattered in that moment was like you were having the help of the decorator, but like what you wanted. And that seems incredibly healing to step into that powerful position after not feeling that for so long.
Yeah. And some of it, to be honest, is that I can make those decisions and that they're okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I have this like super cool flower wallpaper in my bedroom, and it's like, this is amazing. And everyone sees it. Oh, this is amazing. It's like, yeah, I can. Yeah, I did that. I decided that. It is amazing.
Exactly.
Again, it sounds innocuous at those kind of decisions, but
no,
all those layers and all that stuff we were doing for so long, whether it's about constructively for the children or the marriage or not, but like, oh, I just never really feel like I got a chance to really decide that much, and now it's like, okay, I can do that.
Right.
Not only can I decide it, it's okay.
Exactly. It's good. And if anyone who's watching the video can see, like when you said that about the wallpaper, you totally lit up. So it's not just the wallpaper, it's the experience, right? Of saying like, I wanted this, I got it, and I love it. I talk about that a lot in my book too. So I just want to end by asking you a question I ask everyone, which is, if you could go back, whether it was to when you were at the taco stand or before that, with the knowledge and the wisdom that you have now, what would you say to your younger self?
And it's okay to say whatever you need to say. Maybe that's the risk. It's kind of, I'm thinking like risk and reward, that vulnerability, or being like, it seems a more eloquent way to say it, but like it's like, everything's gonna be okay.
Yes, no, that's
no matter what happens.
You're gonna be okay.
Whether this goes on for 50 years or ends in 15 or 5 minutes, there is another side. And it sounds sometimes so trite. And I know like in my clinical work, sometimes like, oh, this sounds like such a therapist thing to say, but like,
right.
if I would tell myself, if you listen closely enough, what it is you're hearing and what it is you want to say is all okay and needs to be said, I guess. If I'm not making sense, but like.
No, you are. You're just saying like, listen more clearly, and that what you think and feel matter. And I think that's such a good message for everybody.
Yeah. And the risk of saying something that might make someone mad, it's the classic example.
Yeah.
It's not worth it's better to say that than to keep it in. And the risk of saying that is probably lesser than I think it is. And the reward is like, okay, well, now it's out, it's gone. Okay, that's.
Yeah. Well, I know we both practice CBT, and I'm thinking like lean into the discomfort, right? Like if it's uncomfortable, there's something there. And so I hope people know that it's scary to do that, but there's such wisdom in leaning into the discomfort.
Yeah. And
Well,
maybe ultimately it's to that to thine own self be true, right? And therefore thou cannot be false to any person.
Yes. That's quite eloquent.
I stole that from Shakespeare. So.
Oh yes, right. Got to quote, make the right.
Yeah.
So Douglas, if people wanted to work with you or find out more about your work, how would people find you?
I'm at a practice called A Good Place Therapy, which is in Lower Manhattan. We have a website, agoodplacetherapy.com. That's a place to do it. You can read about me, the practice, get in touch with Intake, and would love to meet and see anyone who's interested in grief, relationships, divorce, all the sticky stuff that I think we all, especially men, could benefit from talking more about.
Definitely. I wanted to say that too. Maybe we'll have you on another time, talk a little bit about toxic masculinity. So such an important topic. So Douglas, thank you for coming and being vulnerable and sharing your story. I'm really grateful.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I appreciate it.